All right, we're gonna try to keep your attention in an interview about keeping your attention. So about attention spans, and Dr. Gloria Mark is joining us. She's Chancellor's professor at the University of California, Irvine, and the author of the forthcoming book, Attention Span. So Dr. Mark, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So I think that a lot of people know what ADHD is, but I was reading about in regards to this topic, being in a state of flow, which is apparently the opposite. What is that? I don't think I've ever heard that before.
So flow is considered the optimal state of attention. And this is a kind of attention that was discovered by a psychologist, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And he discovered that sometimes people do things that are risk-taking, things that they enjoy. And when you're in a state of flow, you're so immersed in something that you're completely immune to time. So you forget about the passage of time. So that's the idea of flow. You're at your utmost creativity. You are challenged. You're not too challenged. You're not under challenged, but it's actually that sweet spot of just the right amount of challenge.
Okay, there's so many questions I have about this. So apparently there are 4 types of attention, which I didn't know about. I thought there was only one type. What are they and how do you recognize them?
Right. So most people tend to think of attention as being in 2 states. You're focused or you're not focused. So when I first started studying this, my colleagues and I were thinking, you can be engaged in something and very challenged. You can also be engaged in something and not at all challenged, like when you play solitaire. And those are completely different kinds of attention. And so we developed this framework where you can be engaged or not engaged, challenged or not challenged. And we came up with 4 different kinds of attention. When you're engaged and challenged, we call it being focused. Engaged, not at all challenged, like playing solitaire, we call that a rote attentional state. You're not engaged or challenged, we call that being bored. And when you're challenged and you're just not at all engaged, we call that frustrated.
Okay, interesting. Now there's apparent, like, I've always also wondered about multitasking. And I remember watching an Arianna Huffington speech, and she said there is no such thing as multitasking. You can only focus on one thing at a time. You think you're focusing on 2 things, but you're actually not. It's just going back and forth. So is that true? And does multitasking help you become more productive or less productive?
That's right. I mean, it's just not humanly possible to do 2 things that require effort at the same time. Now, if one of these things doesn't require effort, if it's automatic, yes, you can do that. You can chew gum and walk at the same time. You can drive and you can have a conversation because driving can be automatic. But as soon as someone swerves in front of you, it's no longer automatic and you have to put in some effort and you stop talking. So you can't do these 2 things. Now, is multitasking good or bad for us? Well, decades of laboratory research show that when people multitask, they get stressed. We know that blood pressure goes up. There are markers of stress in the body that indicate that people are under stress. We know from real world experience. In my research, we've had people wear heart rate monitors, and we see that the more they switch their attention, the higher it's their stress. And of course, people report being psychologically stressed. Their perceived stress is high. All of these measures are consistent. Now, multitasking is also bad because people make more errors when they multitask. And this is shown in studies with physicians, nurses, pilots. So it's shown in real world professions.
So has our shortest attention spans gotten considerably worse in the digital age?
Yes. So I first started studying this back in 2004. And at the time, I was pretty astonished to find that people spent on average of about 2.5 minutes on any screen. Then in 2012, it went down to about 75 seconds on average on any screen. And then in the last 5-6 years, it seems to have reached a steady state of about 47 seconds. This is measured through objective computer logging techniques, and others have also replicated this result within a few seconds. So yes, it seems that attention spans are diminishing.
So first, I want to understand that a little bit better. Is that they're going email, Twitter, read an article, and really every 47 seconds that they're switching back and forth between those things? And does getting a sandwich, is that included in that? Or is it just they switch between screens every 47 seconds?
Okay, so first of all, we only measured what people do on a screen, right? Okay. So we can only look at computer, phone, and tablet screens. Remember, it's an average. And that means that sometimes people spend longer periods of time, sometimes they spend less. If we look at the median, that's the midpoint, that's 40 seconds. So that means half of all the observations that we found show that attention spans are shorter than 40 seconds. So it means that sometimes, yes, you spend longer periods of time, right? But if we look at the median, half the time our attention on our screens are 40 seconds or less.
That sounds pretty disastrous. Like, are we screwed here? Is our attention span never going to go back to quote unquote normal? Not that anything is really normal, because I bet if you went back and studied it 150 years ago, it would have been much longer than 2.5 minutes. And so, are we toast? And is there a significant downside to having such a short attention span?
So, are we toast? Well, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I am an optimist. And I always believe that when the pendulum starts swinging one way, it's going to swing back. We may have reached the nadir. It may not be possible for attention spans to get any shorter, because then people would just not be able to apprehend anything. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen. But I am an optimist, and I do think that there are things people can do to change, and people can take control of their attention, and they can have agency.
So let's talk about that, because I think taking control of your attention is in some ways taking control of your mind.
Yes.
And that is both very challenging, but also potentially very rewarding. So how does anyone begin to do that?
Yeah, so I draw from the work of very famous social psychologist Albert Bandura, who worked on getting people to improve self-efficacy. And this was in areas like stopping smoking, stopping substance abuse. And I think some of the principles that he wrote about can be applied to our attention. For example, people can learn to become more intentional in their actions. You can become more intentional whenever you try to grab a cigarette. You can also become more intentional every time you try and grab your phone. And you can probe yourself and try to understand the reasons why you do these kinds of automatic actions. When you understand reasons for why you're doing something, it helps you take control. Right. So the first step is to make these automatic actions more conscious. Another example of something we can do is to practice forethought. And what that means is to imagine how our current actions are going to impact our future selves. And future selves could be a few hours from now, could be at the end of the day. So if I'm going to spend an hour on social media, how will that impact my evening when it's 10 p.m.? Am I still going to be working on the deadline, or would I be watching TV, reading a nice book, having a glass of wine? So forethought can help us practice control.
So look, everybody has their own perspective, right? And there's different, buckets that people fall into. And I'm super lucky on this count. I'm in a constant state of flow, not a big deal. I'm partly kidding around, but partly serious. And so I got lucky on that one. So how debilitating is the short attention span? What does it prevent you from doing?
Well, it prevents people from getting into any kind of deep thought, because every time we switch our attention, there's something called a switch cost. And a switch cost, I mean, literally, it's the amount of time that's required to reorient to something else. Plus, you expend a lot of mental resources every time you switch attention, and you don't have mental resources left over to actually do the work that you plan to do.
Yeah, I get it. That makes sense. You're spending a lot of time in transition, constantly in transition, every 47 seconds in transition, right? And so that it can be debilitating. All right, any last tips for how people can have longer attention spans?
Yeah, so people have natural rhythms of attention when their focus can peak, when their focus wanes. Get to know your own personal rhythm, when your peaks are. For most people, it's mid-morning, mid-afternoon. Plan your day, plan your hardest tasks when you have to do the most creative work around those peaks. There are individual differences, everyone is different. Discover what your own attentional peaks are and then plan your day around that.
All right, thank you so much for joining us and shedding light on this. It's Dr. Gloria Mark, and the upcoming book is Attention Span. Hopefully you will have enough attention span to read it. I believe in you, so I believe you will. All right, Dr. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.